Our guest speaker today is the Reverend Julie Taylor. Reverend Taylor is a Unitarian Universalist community minister specializing in critical incident response, community crisis, and pastoral care. Reverend Taylor is the Senior Director of Contextual Ministry and an affiliate professor at Meadville Lombard Theological School. She's a chaplain, captain, serving in the Air National Guard. Agitating, preaching, and working toward dismantling systems of white supremacy are keys in Reverend Taylor's theology and work, and I'm delighted now to welcome Reverend Julie Taylor.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here with you all this morning. Thank you for the invitation. So I know this is, or at least I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, this is the first time that you're doing a hybrid service where the preacher or the speaker is coming to you in the sanctuary from afar. So I'm going to push a couple extra boundaries here just to make things more complicated and do some interactive pieces. So go with me. I'm excited to be here, and hopefully we won't break the internet. So 6 years ago, our family welcomed our second child. I carried our first child, and my wife carried our second baby. And it was a really exciting time for us back then. I can't believe it's already 6.5 years now. As soon as people heard we were pregnant, pretty much the first question was some version or variation of, so are you going to find out? Did you find out? Do you know? Do you want to know? Do you know? Are you having a boy or a girl? And the fact that almost everybody asked showed really how important this seems to be culturally. But the truth is, it's really more complicated than just that question or the answer of, is it a boy or a girl? Or it's a boy. Around the 20-week mark, we went in for an ultrasound. And this is that ultrasound, right? The big one where, depending on the cooperation of the fetus, you might be able to see what they are. And my wife was really excited. Now, I like being surprised, so I didn't really want to know. And when I was pregnant, I decided that we were going to wait until the kid was born to find out. But my wife was not having any of that. We were going to find out early. And since it was her turn, she got to choose. So the ultrasound technician was doing her thing, taking measurements, clicking pictures. For those of you that have been through this, you know what I'm talking about. It's if you don't know how to read an ultrasound, and by read, it mostly means, do you know what this shadow means and what this shadow is and what the shape of this shadow might or might not be? If you don't know how to do that, it's really confusing. So an ultrasound technician was doing all this, and all of a sudden she stops and says, "It's a boy." And then she clicked on the picture and typed an arrow pointing to some other shadows with giant in capital letters, "boy." And right there in the exam room, I thought, well, maybe not. It's more complicated than that. So what do I mean when I say it's more complicated than that? So here's where we're going to do an exercise. So we're going to try this with some of you in the sanctuary, and for those of you online, we're going to try a couple of ways to do this. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you to answer. If you're on Zoom, if you want to type this into the chat, that would be the way to do it. And for those of you in the sanctuary, initially you're going to raise hands, and the Reverend's going to probably translate. We're working on this, and maybe type into the chat. So my first question to you is, how many of you take your coffee black? If you take your coffee black, type that into the chat. I'm not seeing anything online yet here, or actually I can see all you all out there in the congregation, so you can raise your hand. I can see you. How many of you take your coffee black, or raise a hymnal if you can't raise your hand? So we get I see some movement out there. Yep. And I'm seeing people in the chat. Oh yes, black only with exclamation marks. There's a yes, there's some, yeah, I haven't gotten to the no's yet, folks. All right. So the second question is, How many of you take your coffee with cream, milk? All right, I see some yeses in the chat. I see some hands raised out there. All right. Good deal. All right. All right. Now, different question. If I was to like head out to a coffee shop right now and do a coffee run, and I was going to get coffee for everybody in the room, I was going to get something for everybody. Don't worry about how much it costs. Now, this is right. This is a theoretical. This is just a question. But what would you get? What would you want? And those of you in the chat, type into the chat what you would like. And for those of you who are in the sanctuary there, hopefully I'm going to get some answers, and Rev's going to type them in or going to speak them here to me. And I'm going to read some of the things I'm seeing in the chat right now. Ice mocha latte. We got a decaf mocha, frappuccino caramel. Somebody earlier wrote something about they want coffee with almond milk. Somebody says they don't drink coffee. Large iced coffee, a shot of espresso, splash of cream, latte with almond milk, lattes, caramel mocha, large coffee, heavy cream, shot of hazelnut, cold brew with oat milk, some kind of tea, raspberry mocha, strongest brew with cream, black with honey, latte, mocha, espresso, right? Dirty chai with soy milk, frappuccino. All right. So there's a whole bunch of, oh, the text, right? Thanks, Tech, is typing those things from the sanctuary there. Don't drink coffee. All right. So when presented, this little exercise here, thank you for cooperating. We did that pretty well all together here. When presented with a binary, most people are going to place themselves within that binary, this or this, this or this. However, when presented with given an open-ended choice, most people are going to place themselves on a spectrum rather than on one end or another. And that's really important. I want to keep this in mind as we're going to take a look at this image, which I'm going to share my screen here. Keep that in mind as we take a look at this image, and I believe y'all can see this, which is called the genderbread person. All right. Now, I'm going to kind of break this down, and I think here, if I click on this, I think you can see a laser pointer. I think you could see that. So, but I kind of go through this. So the genderbread person. So there, I'm going to break this down a little bit. I'm not going to go too deep in it. Y'all can check this out online if you like. Biological sex. Now, most folks assume biological sex is simple and that it is the same as gender identity. And that's the thing that most people are talking about when they say, what are you going to have when you're having a child? So that's what I want to start with. But these things are not the same. Gender identity, biological sex, it's so much more complicated. When biological sex, again, isn't simple. There are lots of ways that we have been traditionally named and that we've traditionally named male or female body parts, right? Biological sex is also connected, though, to genetics. It's not just about the physical body parts that we like to talk about in OWL and other places, right? Even people whose genitals appear easy for a doctor or an ultrasound technician to interpret, those folks don't necessarily, and they don't always have XY or XX genes. There's more than that. Biological sex is more than just genitals. It also includes genes. So when you have XXY, XXO, partial X, and there are more variations even than that in biological sex. 1 in 114 people are born with a complicated biological sex. And that there are lots of terms for the details in that, but the overarching term for that is intersex, which we have right here. So on this spectrum, we've got female, we've got male, we've got intersex, and a whole lot on the spectrum in between. The antonym for intersex is endosex. So if you are not someone who is intersex, you are someone who is endosex. Now, gender identity where is that on here? Gender identity up here at the top. That's more internal. So the biological sex is somewhat external, but it also encompasses genes and chromosomes, things like that as well. So gender identity also on a spectrum, how your sense of ourselves along the spectrum. Now, because it tends to be internal, gender identity is not necessarily visible to others. You've got gender queer is here on this slide. There's other terms for this when we're looking at the traditionally binary. We've got woman, we've got man on kind of ends of a spectrum if you think in the binary term, but now that we're looking at a spectrum and we're working with a spectrum here, gender queer, transgender, gender non-binary are all different places on this spectrum. Now, cisgender would be the name that would be the antonym to transgender, genderqueer, gender non-binary. So if one is more on the binary sides, on man, woman, that would be cisgender rather than transgender, genderqueer, gender non-binary. Now, let's move down to gender expression, which is how one presents oneself. And again, this is a continuum, how people express their gender and their experience of their gender. And in terms of culturally, there's a lot of, this is a place where you get a lot of stereotypes around gender expression about what boys are supposed to dress like, what girls are supposed to like to do. Boy, we're getting into times to holidays where presents are coming out and gifts are coming out, and wow, do we see a whole lot in terms of assumptions and stereotypes around gender right now, with all of the advertisements for toys that are pink or blue, or who's in the advertisements. Pay attention to that as we're thinking about this right now, because it is everywhere, the assumptions around what gender expression means in terms of biological sex and gender identity. All right. Sexual orientation is who one is romantically or sexually attracted to. And this isn't a binary either, because not only because of bisexuality, which is certainly part of this, but also because how we are attracted physically, emotionally, spiritually to other people, that's part of this within relation to our own gender and sex, but also in relation to theirs. And then the last one on this list, and this genderbread person image has been around for a number of years now, and they've recently added commitment style, which is how we choose to be with those we are in relationship with. And for some, it's a commitment style is more casual. It can be monogamous, anything in between, which includes polyamorous. There's a whole lot of variation within commitment style as well. So the genderbread person, this then brings the question, a gender unicorn is also very good. That's another, I think that's another image. I see someone in the chat mentioning that. So there's great, I gotta tell you, the internet is your friend with all of this. There's so many great things to be found on the internet and ways to learn more all the time, which is one of the pieces that I'm gonna get at. And it brings my next question, what does this mean for us as UUs? And the first thing I think it means is that we're always going to be learning. That's part of our principles, right? Is that we are going to have a responsible and earnest and a deep need to have a search for truth and meaning. How does this all work for us? What does this mean for us? What does this mean for someone else? So that's number one, right? How are we going to learn this? Number two, though, I think we always need to assume that everyone is in the room. Okay. Not that we should, it's not that we should be talking about gender and non-conforming gender behavior or non-conforming expression or transgender folks or gender non-binary. It's not that we're just going to talk about this because someday there might be somebody who's trans or gender non-binary in the congregation or someone in our family. We need to talk about this because we need to assume that there is at least one transgender person in the room, even if they haven't told you. Even if they haven't told you. And as a cisgendered person, if you would use language differently, if you knew a transgender person was around, you should use language differently now, because we should always assume everyone is in the room. Always. A few years ago, the Human Rights Campaign conducted a survey of 10,000 LGBTQ youth, ages 13 to 17. And these youth were asked to identify their gender, male, female, or transgender. And this is a number of years ago. So they had those three choices. They also left, though, a blank space for responses and how folks self-identified outside of those three options. 1,000 out of 10,000, 1,000 chose transgender. About 600 of them filled in the blank, everything from gender fluid to gender neutral. So 1,600 out of those 10,000 found themselves somewhere on that spectrum that was not part of the binary choices. The Human Rights Campaign, as a result of that, now uses the word transgender as a starting point or an umbrella term for all the pieces within the spectrum beyond the binary. So thinking about this, transgender, genderqueer, nonconforming, Z, I don't know, I just can't figure it out. And it's overwhelming. What if I'm wrong? Well, first of all, it's really important that we don't assume. We can't assume, especially if you just paying attention to the gender-bred person here. Biological sex is not just what is necessarily obvious on the outside, right? Gender identity is internal. We can't assume. So we can ask, and pronouns are a good start. And so the good question is, hey, what are your pronouns? And I say that specifically, not what are your preferred pronouns, but what are your pronouns? Many colleges are beginning to start this right out at freshman orientation now. At my own school, where I'm a professor and I'm the part of the administration at Meadville Lombard Theological School, our first days and as part of even the incoming paperwork and applications, asking people's pronouns is part of the is just part of our paperwork now. Asking people's there's names. How would you like to be called? Are you by your first name, by your last name, by a middle name, by a name that may not be the one on your birth certificate, but this is the name that we're going to use while we're in community together, right? And it's not just colleges, right? The school where my kids attend, the grade school, they pay attention to this. And there are kids with different pronouns at the school. It's really important. It's key. A number of years ago, many years ago now, TRUST, which is Transgender Religious Professional Unitarian Universalists Together, TRUUST, TRUST gave out buttons with a space on them at General Assembly, gave out these buttons to write pronouns so that people at General Assembly could see them and use them. And that kicked some things off. And this is now just kind of part of business as usual at General Assembly and at many congregations. So if you're thinking, well, I'm kind of set in my ways, I don't know if I'm too set in my ways for this. If that's the internal dialogue running around in your head, I would ask if you would become willing, if you would be willing to place our UU principles over grammar, to place kindness over grammar. Linguist Dennis Barron at the University of Illinois points to the evolution of the word you as an example of how language is expansive. He writes, and this is a quote, "Purists object that a plural pronoun like they can't be used as singular, but they are wrong. You began its life as plural. The singular second person was thou. And then you began serving as singular as well. Today we use you to refer to one person, like, are you talking to me? Without worrying about number. And for most people, they works in the same way." Unquote. So even the they and them debate itself has been going on for some time. Barron referred to an 1878 issue of the Atlantic magazine arguing that he and she needed replacing. In that article, it reads, quote, "We need a new pronoun." This is 1878. "We need a new pronoun. The need of a personal pronoun of the singular number and common gender is so desperate, urgent, and imperative that according to the established theories, it should long have grown in our speech as the tails grew off monkeys," unquote. 1878, the Atlantic was calling for a singular pronoun that was beyond he and she. These are things that we need to pay attention to and consider. Suicide, murder, national statistics, more than 50% of transgender youth will have at least one suicide attempt by their 20th birthday. November 20th, which has just passed, is the Transgender Day of Remembrance, where we remember those in our community who have been killed. On the 20th here, just a little over a week ago, there were 46 names read. Within days, it was up to 47 trans and gender non-binary people murdered in the United States this year. And that's just in the United States. And that number is just folks that were known to be, and it was made public that they were trans or gender non-binary. The number of people who are not recognized as such means that that number is likely to be much, much, much larger. The majority of those folks were people of color. So really, in context, is grammar that important? Now, beyond just looking at language, as individuals and as congregation, we can show up. So what can we do as UUs? We can, number one, start by always assuming everyone is the room, but what else can you do? A serious issue that trans people have to deal with daily is bathrooms. Being perceived as being in the wrong bathroom may be embarrassing, yes, but for trans and gender non-binary people, it's potentially life-threatening. Over 19 states have proposed bills over the last couple of years that make it illegal for an individual to use a public bathroom that was not born, a bathroom designated if that individual was born as a biological member of that sex, right? You've probably heard about these bathroom bills that have happened all over the place. A study called Gendered Restrooms and Minority Stress found that 58% of transgender people who responded reported they have avoided going out in public because there were not sufficient safe public restrooms available. Now, there's a great resource, the Transgender Law Center. It's a publication called Peeing in Peace. And these resources that I have here before the end of the service, I'll type them up in the chat so that y'all have access to those, okay? Peeing in Peace is a publication you can find from the Transgender Law Center, and it's well worth a read. Now, unless you're building a new facility, you're stuck with what you have in terms of bathrooms. So you have to figure out, what are you going to do with that? Now, for many years now, there have been gender neutral bathrooms designated at General Assembly. And, General Assembly happens in giant not stadiums, but conference centers where the bathrooms are what the bathrooms are. So the organizers go through and designate and put new signs up for the time of the UU General Assembly to make peeing in peace a possibility for those who are not traditionally part of the binary of male-female world. Now, it is my understanding that you all have signs on your bathroom doors there at the congregation, letting people know that folks know where they need to be and to believe that whoever is in the bathroom is right where they're supposed to be. And that's great. That's fantastic that y'all have even gone that far along in this consideration. And in general, I believe you also have a couple of single stall bathrooms. There's never any reason that a single stall bathroom should ever be gendered, right? So one of the things that you can also do, though, knowing that you have both multiple stall and then single, is to make sure that there are signs directing people to single stall bathrooms. That is a way that you could make UUI a much more welcoming place for visitors and friends and members who may need to be directed that way and may not want to, nor should they really have to ask. So what else can you do? Again, I've talked about pronouns, but use the names and pronouns people ask us to. That's something that could happen. Again, we don't have to assume, we can ask. When you're in person, you can make name tags that include name and a space for pronouns on the name tag. On Zoom, I noticed that a number of folks have added pronouns, right? So there it is. I also want to mention that demanding that everyone use their pronouns is not particularly inclusive, because there are some folks that are not out. There are some folks that are not out in all circumstances for different reasons. It is not safe for everyone who is trans or gender non-binary to be public about their pronouns. So a demand for that can actually cause some folks to be put in danger. Pay attention to that and lift that up as well. So remembering that Trans Day of Remembrance is certainly something that you can do and recognize. And it's my understanding that that happened last week in your worship service. Also, there's Transgender Day of Visibility, which is on March 31st every year. And that is a celebration of the visibility, lifting people up, paying attention, and recognizing the contributions that trans folk have brought to our communities, to the world at large. So that it's not just, Trans Day of Remembrance is really important. That is a sacred day, without a doubt. And if we only remember trans people in death, we're not recognizing and honoring the lives that are lived. So March 31st, Transgender Day of Visibility. The National Center for Transgender Equality has a list of, it's like 50, 52, 53 things that you can do for transgender equality. Take a look at that list and then find out what's happening already in Indianapolis. And I notice some of you are all over the place. Wherever you are in your community, find out what's happening there and find out ways that you can support the work that's being done. Support the work that's already being done. Right? There are leaders from this community. Support what they're doing instead of necessarily making sure that you're creating something new. Follow along. Oh, this is a great organization that I highly recommend every congregation get connected with, and that is the Transforming Hearts Collective. The Transforming Hearts Collective. They have online courses like Trans Inclusion in Congregations and a new course, Radical Welcome. This is a phenomenal organization. Transforming Hearts Collective is led by, and they're actually some dear friends of mine, Alex Capitan and Reverend Michael Slack are two of the leaders of this organization. And they're really wonderful Unitarian Universalists. The whole collective isn't UU exclusively, but Alex and Michael are, and supporting their organization is incredible. They are phenomenal spiritual leaders and educators. You can also look at what's happening right where you are at UUI in terms of policies and events. Take a look at your scripts, really encounter that and consider it through a trans inclusive lens. And when you come across things that maybe need to be changed, make changes. Hymns are a great place to start. So many of our hymns have binary language in them, including one of the hymns that I've chosen for today, Everything Possible, which is by Fred Small. And we're going to sing it here right after the sermon. Now, I've still decided to include this hymn, but I'm going to give it some context before we sing it. There are things in our tradition and even in our liturgies that hurt people. And it's usually people who have been marginalized who are hurt the worst. So how we navigate these parts of our tradition can make our community a welcome place, a healing place, a place of transformation, a place of love. How we navigate them can also be complex in that there is no one way to do it, not even two ways, especially since we're working towards more of a non-binary and complex experience and understanding of marginalization in general, certainly around gender. Gender is not binary, it never has been. But we're at a point in history where we get the opportunity to acknowledge that fact and allow it to shape all of our lives in a positive way. There are justice issues around this, political and social ways to respond, all of which I would encourage you to get involved with. But I know that's not going to be everybody's choice. Even if you don't think this is worth your time right now, can you consider having your heart be open? Can you be willing to be open to somebody in this congregation, person to person? If you think there isn't anybody here today who's transgender or gender non-binary, you'd be wrong. I pray all of our hearts are open. And for goodness sake, the next time somebody you know is having a baby, please hold off. Stop yourself from asking the binary questions and the insistings of the binary. Just slow it down. For my trans, gender non-binary, intersex siblings, I'm so glad you're here. I recognize you. You're beautiful. You're important. You are loved. And you are most definitely not alone. I want to be all of me. All I want to be is me. Amen. So our final hymn is number 1019 in the Teal hymnal, Everything Possible. But before I begin, I want to give it some context. So there is gender binary language in this hymn, in the lyrics. It was written in 1983 by Fred Small, and Fred is still alive and has been contacted by a number of people and asked, what do we do with this language? Because this is difficult. And since, you're still here, what would you like us to do about this binary language? Are you willing to change some of those lyrics? And so Fred responded, and I'll put the website up so in the chat so that folks can learn about this. Fred responded by giving some historical context to this hymn. He wrote at the request, that this is a quote now, that he wrote this hymn at the request of a lesbian mother trying to raise her 9-year-old son amidst the pressure of toxic masculinity. That's why he wrote this back in 1983. When asked if he would consider changing the binary lyrics, he responded, and this is a quote, "I've thought about revising the lyrics to eliminate the gender binary, but it's not an easy fix. For now, my hope is that the lyric, 'You can dream all the day, never reaching the end of everything possible for you,' that lyric affirms an infinite range of sexual, affectional orientation, and gender presentation and identity." So please keep those contexts and complexities in mind as we sing number 1019, Everything Possible. The closing words are from Frederick E. Gillis. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. Blessed be. Go in peace.